All right, we are live today with a very exciting topic. I'm excited to talk to you guys about the topic that we have today. But first, welcome everybody. It's good to see everybody. Pastor Tony, welcome back. You took a week off. It's as good to have you back. So, anything exciting that you did last week?
Yeah, it's good to be back. I was on a vacation, just a weekend getaway to Myrtle
Nice.
Beach, and my wife and we had a fantastic time. She loved it and wants to go back.
That's awesome. You guys so deserve that. That is so cool.
We are live today.
That is awesome.
With a very exciting topic. I'm excited to talk to
Oh,
you
well,
guys
now we got real issues here.
today. But first, welcome everybody. It's good to see everybody. Pastor Tony, welcome back.
Well, that happens when you don't stop your own live stream. That's awesome. Well, good to go. Hey, let's talk about the topic for today that we have, which is anger. I am excited about diving in, talking to you guys about this. It is a topic that I think we all have dealt with. Would you guys agree with that? As a matter of fact, we were talking just a second earlier, and I think one of the things that is really good to know from the get-go is that we will all be dealing with it. And if we would not be dealing with it, we would probably not be human, because anger is just one of those things that happens all the time. As a matter of fact, man, I came home today and we had some issues in my home that we were dealing with. So anger is just always there. And I want to start by giving us two scripture verses. One is in Ephesians 4:26 and then Ephesians 4:31. Those are kind of like our guidelines for today. And then we're going to dive right in and kind of define anger. So Ephesians 4:26 says this: in your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you're still angry. So obviously he's saying here, okay, you are going to get angry, but when you do get angry, do not sin. And then he goes on 5 verses later. This is Paul talking. He says this: get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. So it's kind of interesting saying, hey, so you will get angry, but get rid of it all. So before we dive in and kind of talk about this for the next few minutes that we have together, let's define what anger is. For me, anger is kind of defined as an emotion. It's something that happens when we get emotionally involved, our emotions get stirred, and then we choose to become angry. And I always have, this is big to me, that it's our choice to become angry. Because when these emotions come up, we can choose, are we going to get angry, or are we going to go, to quote someone that preached just recently a little bit, walk away? And I think this is really important that we make that decision. How are we going to choose? Are we going to be angry or not? Pastor Tony, what's your definition of anger?
Yeah, I really like what you said, PS. I always like referring to the dictionary directly. So the dictionary says a strong feeling of displeasure aroused by a wrong. And then it also says wrath or rage. And but yeah, I mean, I think that's so true what the dictionary says and what you were saying, that typically anger is a result when there's a perceived wrong. We feel that we have been wronged in some way, shape, or form, and the reaction that we have can be many things. We could get sad in that moment, but anger is certainly one of the reactions that we can have.
Very good. Pastor Daniel, what would you say?
I mean, I like that definition. I mean, I don't really have too much to add. I think you guys nailed it pretty good.
Anything from your end, Pastor Lee, before we dive into the subject?
I think generally anger can manifest itself in a number of ways. And I think we'll kind of get into this later. Just the idea of being upset in general, being frustrated or irritated, letting an emotion of, like the word you use, displeasure, Pastor Tony, letting that emotion kind of take over how the emotions that we're experiencing and take over our general sense of joy and peace and patience, things like that. So yeah, anger is definitely something worth talking about and labeling so that we can identify it and conquer it moving forward.
Great. Well, then let's dive in. Let's talk about it. So Pastor Tony, let's start with you and give you a tough one, since you're always good in answering the tough questions. Is it possible for us to have an anger that is actually an okay kind of anger? And I guess the scripture reference, or the scripture would call this a righteous kind of anger. Is it okay, and is it possible for us to have righteous anger? And maybe even comparing that a little bit to what is the difference between righteous anger and actually being angry at someone and going into what Paul calls, obviously, sin? So would you kind of jump in and answer that question for us?
Yeah, no, it's good. And as far as the distinction, I think a lot of times, well, at least what comes to my mind, I think when people say they're having righteous anger, They could be thinking of things. Of course, God's anger is certainly righteous anger, but God's anger isn't a category by himself. God is angry at sin. When Jesus drove out the money changers in the temple, that's an example of what is true righteous anger. But when we're using it to refer to us as humans having righteous anger, as people sometimes do, that's when people are angry at like injustices, like human trafficking or racism and things like that. And that's kind of the stereotype. But I think there's even another level to this, where I think if we're going to bring it down to the practical level, to those of you who are probably listening to this right now, it goes back to the definition, a wrong against us. So if you have your sibling or a parent or a friend and they wrong you in some way, and you just know, man, they are in the wrong. What they did to me was not right, and you get angry. Sometimes we might feel justified in having that anger and even call it righteous anger. But to the question, can we have righteous anger as humans? I personally believe the answer is no. And I want to point you to James chapter 1, verses 19 through 20, because this to me, it just deals with the issue so clearly. It says, but everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger, for the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. And so in this verse, James says that the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God, meaning that in our human anger, so any of the examples we just gave, I think it is very clear to all of us that racism and human trafficking and all these horrible things, that they are wrong, and it does stir us in our emotions. Mm-hmm. But anger is not the emotion that needs to be coming to the forefront, and it's impossible. Even if I were to kind of paraphrase this verse, I would say it's impossible for human anger to result in the righteousness of God. And so yeah, I kind of just said a lot right there. So
good.
That was great. Hey, you guys jump in. That was really good. I love that. And I love what you said, that can't be the one that rises to the forefront. That's really good. Love it. What do you guys want to add on that?
I don't know. I'm thinking about it, and I'm like, I hear you. I hear the verse and everything. So I don't know. Allow me to kind of push back, because in my head I'm thinking like, even with the example you gave of Jesus, flipping the tables and everything, like, would that count as partly human anger, right? Because he was human and he was feeling these, emotions, and obviously he was also 100% God as well. And so in that, is he's still able to have, righteous anger and the anger of God, right? And so I don't know. I think of like, like you brought up racial injustice. That's like what the biggest examples when people talk about righteous anger and stuff like that. And so would that still count as like something that God would be angry at? And if we felt the same way, would that still not be, would it still count as like a human anger? I mean, in the sense of we don't let it to cause us to sin and all that. So I don't know. That's just the question I have.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Pastor Daniel. And certainly I think about the example of, like you said, like racism or human trafficking. And so my thinking is somebody who is stirred and sees the wrong and is bothered by it. When we think of anger, I'm thinking of hostility. I'm thinking of, like P.S. said, emotion. And a person just venting on social media or, to people that they talk to on the street, is that practically doing anything to resolve those issues? And my thinking is no. And if anything, it's going to cause more damage to the cause that they're trying to right, versus, so that's why I say having a quote righteous anger isn't the response to that issue Instead, it should move them to productive actions, seeking to address those issues in all the various ways, that we don't need to get into right now, but seeking proactive action, as opposed to, because, I think people will use the whole righteous anger card as a mask a lot of times for them going off on a particular subject. And so that is, I think the intent of saying I'm displeased with this wrong, and so I want to do something about it, is great and godly even. But to lash out in anger and justify it as, you're upset about it because God is, I don't think the execution ever matches the what they're trying to do.
Yeah. Me and my brother have had this conversation before. So I actually texted him and asked him, hey, we've talked about this before, this idea of righteous anger. Is it possible, right? And I want to quote him real quick. He said something. He said, I don't know that righteous anger usually translates into the actions that people try to claim as a result of their righteous anger. And he said, if people want to be angry about the things that God is angry about, and they want to call that righteous anger, then that's fine. He said, it's usually what people do next that I have a problem with, right? And that's kind of what we're defining here. Like the question is, when we talk about racism, is like, is it okay to be upset by that? Like you're describing, Pastor Tony, and it's like, well, yeah, of course, but then you ask the question, okay, so what do we do? Right now we're talking about the difference between an emotion and an action. And if your action results in something that is not righteous, like my brother is talking about, then that's not okay. It's like, we're not talking about righteous anger anymore. We're talking about sin and action, So then you talk about like, what would be the response or what would be a righteous response to this upset feeling that you're experiencing? And of course, if you're choosing between more hate and more judgment, then no, that's not okay. But if you talk about asserting love, asserting grace and patience and truth into these situations, then that's when I think the righteous anger emotion results in righteous action rather than allowing the righteous anger of emotion to lead you into action that is not pleasing to God.
Yeah, that's perfect, man. I love this discussion, guys. And this goes right back to Ephesians 4:26, really what we open up with, because it is human to become angry and to become mad and frustrated at things, especially when you see injustices, since we're talking about that. You see something, it's wrong, and inside you're like, oh, that is so wrong, and I want to do something about it. And here's what Paul says: in your anger, do not sin. And that's so interesting. So we have this emotion that comes up, that rises up in us and says, I am mad and frustrated with it, and I want to do something to change it. And then both of you guys were talking about, the problem is, what do we do with this afterwards?
Right.
Like, what is the next response? Is our next response, we're going to take this anger and use that as our driving force? Or do we then say, okay, God, what can I do to make something right here? And what is your way of doing things? And that is so cool, because Paul very clearly said, again, get rid of all anger and rage. And anger usually leads to rage, and then it leads to all kinds of other stuff. So you guys are nailing it. This is really good discussion. Great question too, Pastor Daniel. That was really good. Did that answer it for you, Pastor Daniel? What do you think? Is that good?
I guess we're still thinking, okay, well, is it possible to have righteous anger? So
yeah, keep going, man. Keep going with this. This is good.
I totally understand where Pastor Tony's coming from with, it's not really, whenever you hear it, you hear people say, oh yeah, this is righteous, blah, blah, blah. And then a lot of times their actions after are sinful, or they're just tearing someone down with their words, and they feel justified because the thing they're angry about is something that God would be angry about.
Yes.
So I totally see that. But I think, I don't know, for myself, like I think about, when all this stuff was happening with, the racial stuff, like I got angry, I did. And I didn't post anything on social media. I didn't. So I don't know. I'm kind of like wrestling with myself of like, what did I do in that instance, and was it the right response? Was it the right way to, handle it? And so, yeah, I was just thinking about, everything that happened, and when I was angry, like what were my thoughts? What was my actions? What were my conversations like? Um, and stuff like that. So I don't know. I'm kind of wrestling with it
It's great. Yeah.
in myself to kind of figure that out.
I think it's interesting when, and this is obviously, I'm talking about myself here, but I can generally tell, and most of the times when I'm really angry, like I know I'm in the flesh, like there's no doubt about it. And most of the times when that happens, but there are times when I see an injustice and it's like, okay, God, this is really like, there's this deep pain in my heart that's not even like I want to beat someone up, but it's more like there's this pain that I can't even describe in words. And there's something wrong and I'm really frustrated and angry with that. And that's the best way I can even describe it. Most of the times, though, when it comes to anger, like I'm angry because number one, we talked about this. I choose to be angry, but it's it's interesting to say, hey, how do we define that? And then I love how you were talking about. I'm checking myself when I'm seeing, processing. Really, what it comes down to is what's the motivation behind my anger, and how am I going to go? And David Baines in there in the chat there was talking about, PJ talking about this a couple of weeks ago in a sermon, that in your anger, you would either be sad or mad. And I think this kind of goes even into what we're talking about here. Like mad is the, I want to beat someone up. Sad is this like grieving of the Holy Spirit inside of you. Something is not right and somebody's got to do something about it.
It's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, it's important to realize that right now we're in a season of grace, right? And, Pastor Dan, you talked about, you're admitting to feeling anger with all of the racism and social injustice that
And we all did.
going on. Yeah, of course. But, then you continue to say, Pastor Daniel, but I didn't do this or I didn't do that. And, I think what we want is like a yes or no answer. And, unfortunately that doesn't exist. And like we saw in Ephesians chapter 4 starting off today, like the Bible doesn't really give us a yes or no answer either. And I think that there's like a reason for that, because our whole call as disciples and believers is to make war with our sin and to fight our flesh, right? To conquer our flesh. And so in those moments when we are experiencing anger and like we see it, Paul says, don't act on or do not sin in your anger. In those seasons when we accomplish that and don't sin in our anger, that I know is pleasing to God, right? That I know is a win because we're experiencing sin and we're not letting it lead our lives and we're not letting it control us. And that's a win, right? So when we experience anger and we successfully don't act on it or don't let it lead us to sin, that is a win. I mean, that's like accomplishing what God's called us to accomplish, So I think we should see that, see our anger as an opportunity to even honor the Lord.
Yeah, that's the perfect segue to a question that I would love to ask Pastor Daniel, and that is it possible for us to control our anger? And it sounds like that you're doing a fantastic job with wrestling through those things. So I would love for you to drop some wisdom on how do we do that? How do we control our anger? How do we get rid of anger? How do we get rid of these things in our lives? And how do we make sure that we don't, let the Hulk out and kind of beat someone up in the process? So what's your answer to that?
I mean, I would say yes, it is definitely possible because, like we talked about, anger is an emotion that we feel, and it really comes down to what we choose to do when we feel those things. And so, I mean, I think for even in my own life, it's something that I've had to, take time with because when I was a teenager, I used to just hold everything in and, I would just like blast music in my earphones and, take a walk or something. But now I think, when something happens that, I mean, I don't really get angry often, honestly. Like my personality is like super laid back. So for me, it's more so like frustration and like irritation where that's kind of like the emptive to anger, right? You start feeling yourself get there. And so for me, I usually, I'll take a deep breath, I'll stop, I may walk out of the room, I may stop talking. I just take a moment And this is pretty much what I said in the sermon I talked about a few weeks back. Is I just had to, walk away. A lot of times I have to walk away and, allow myself time to process these emotions and what I'm doing right, what they're doing right, what I'm doing wrong, what they're doing wrong. And it's so funny because me and my wife, like, whenever we get into it a little bit in the argument, like, she'll say something and I'll feel myself like getting irritated or whatever, and I'll just stop talking. And she'll be like, well, are you gonna say something? And I'm like, I just need time to process. And so I think, walking away, taking time to process and allowing Holy Spirit to, to do those things, to remove bitterness and rage and all that, it helps you to control anger. And so that way you're not sinning in your anger, because once you let it keep going and going and going, that's when you're gonna fly off the handle. You're gonna say something that you want to take back. You may do something physically, like, that's when it kind of, gets out of control. But you kind of teach yourself to take moments to walk away, or to take time for yourself, or to remove yourself from whatever the situation is that's irritating you. And you're able to control your anger that way. And of course, with the tons of help from Holy Spirit.
Right. 100%. Yes. I love how you're always so calm. And this is definitely a personality, Pastor Daniel, where you're calm and, you can just kind of, you're like, yeah, I realize I'm getting angry. And then I'll just not say anything. That's not quite my response. When I get angry, it's like I really have to make a conscious decision of, okay, this is going to go bad here in a moment. So I'll have these arguments in my head. So did you ever have any stories with your siblings where you had that? I mean, you have a lot of siblings, so I only had two. And my sister and I definitely had moments where we got into it. My brother and I, not so much, which is actually funny, but it's probably because he was 4 years younger. My sister and I were close together, but we definitely had our moments. As a matter of fact, I remember one time, I don't know why and what, but I did punch a hole in the wall or in my door. So I was pretty mad. So I definitely had anger issues. Did you have any stories like that?
Oh yeah, 100%. I was I was always the calm one and the more reasonable one. And so like I have a twin brother and we would get into it a lot. All right. And so he would always be the one that would flip out. So there's one specific story. We were playing a video game. I think we were like taking turns, right? So he died like within seconds. So I'm like, all right, it's my turn. Right. And he's like, no, I'm playing again. I was like, no, it's my turn. He's like, no, I'm playing again. So he started playing. So I just got up quietly and I unplugged the whole thing. And he like flipped out on me. Like he attacked me. He was trying to swing on me. So he's bigger than me now, but I was bigger than him back then. So I grabbed him. I put him on the ground and I put my knee on his chest and just held him down. All right. So he's flipping out. He can't move. And he spit in my face. Okay. And I had this like seeing red moment. Like
Yeah.
I looked at him but still in that moment, I was like, all right, you know what? I can't do anything because it's not the right thing to do. So I went and I told my mom, and my mom did nothing. And I bring that story up to this day. I literally brought that up like a few months ago because I was like, I did the right thing. I could have beat him up and no, he got no consequences. But yeah, there's definitely a ton of stories of us getting mad and just flying off the handle. So yeah.
Yeah. I know for me, like whenever I do experience anger, it's not like this thing that's about to come. For me, it's like, I'm like, oh, whoops, I just got angry. Like it's done. It's over. I already snapped at somebody, I already said something I really wish I hadn't, and and that just leads me to like, man, Lord, again, like I've fallen short of your glory. Forgive me.
Yeah.
But in order for me to combat that like when I'm angry, I don't even know until it's over, or I'm not aware of when it's coming. For me, it's like it's a consistency in the spirit, right? Like you kind of ended your answer there, Pastor Daniel, of course, like a ton of help of the spirit. And that's so true. if anger is something that we can't identify before it happens, but it's something that we're regretful of after it happens, then for people like me, if you're someone like that, it's really important that you learn to live a spirit-filled life, a life that's constantly relying on the Spirit, right? A life that's constantly surrounded by the Spirit, by the Word, and leaning on God's heart to lead your heart in every situation.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good. I think one thing to understand here too, I know we're having a little fun with it here, and I love how you bring it in, Pastor Leo. It's like the anger is not okay. Obviously, this is not something that God wants us to have, and it's not okay. The problem with anger is that when we do get angry, it's interesting to me how we can, and then this is strange, I guess, especially in if you're married, but I think it's also when you have a sibling, it's the same kind of thing where you can be completely 100% okay. You didn't even think about being angry. And one little instant, and you're going from 0 to 100. And it's like, what just happens? Like this Jekyll and Hyde moment that really there's a switch inside of you that flips. And it's just crazy how quickly that can go. But we need to know that that is not okay. And the thing is, sometimes it feels good to be angry. And sometimes it feels good to just let it out on everybody, not understanding fully that what you do is you literally, I always use this kind of phrase, like you vomit on someone as you're doing this, and you're leaving all this stuff out there. You feel great afterwards because you said what you wanted to say. Well, I did. And then the other person is literally destroyed in the process. So I guess for us to understand, like if this is like a pattern in our lives, if this happens, a couple of times a month and you just blow up, what's our counseling to that person, or what's our counseling to us if this is our thing? Like, do we need to get healing? What do we need to do in order to get rid of this? Because ultimately this is not something that we can have, for 80 years in our lives, because we all know this, when we have these little things in our lives, they only get worse, and they only get magnified when you become married and when you have kids. That there's just things that happen in those instances that you didn't even know you had in your life. So what do we do, guys? How do we overcome it? How do we really get that out of our lives? And what do we need to do in order to do it? Besides, obviously, yes, I got to control myself, but what are some things are there some, like, I guess, things that you put in your life, safeguards that have helped you to really control yourself?
Well, this may be, I think what you said, PS, was so good that, so recognizing that, anger is an emotion we feel that we're prone to given our fallen nature, and so that is stating that up front. And then with that being the case, I know Pastor John has, for years talked about the listening test. He specifically lays this out in his conflict sermon series, which is only like 5 or 6 sermons long on the website. If you guys have not heard it, it's excellent. Yep. And he said, Pastor John himself has said that, he was a rageaholic, and he came from a family of rageaholics. And he said, through using the listening test, which is basically where you are upset with someone, and so you choose to start arguing their heart. Okay, so what this person thinks, what they want, what they were expecting, why they're upset, all those things. And you begin to argue, not just, doing it to go through the motions, but genuinely trying to understand and argue their position as if you were their lawyer,
That's so good.
And then he said that like within seconds, eliminates all his anger, because his heart has changed positions. It's no longer I'm mad at you, but it's a heart position of I'm trying to understand you. And so that's definitely something that I've adopted in my life. I've seen the fruit of it in my life. So that may not be on the how to stop it from happening. And because there is a level where, it does just happen, there's those outbursts, that just kind of come out of nowhere, like PS and Pastor Leo were talking about. But that is something that in the moment when you recognize it, you can grab a hold of it and begin to control it and rein it in.
I love it. That is so good. Good stuff, Pastor Tony.
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest things is just be quick to apologize. Like, it's going to happen. We're going to say something we didn't mean, or something's just going to come out. And just be quick to apologize. I think a lot of times we get so prideful and we're like, they'll just get over it. And we just, leave it at that. But, when you apologize, you're able to, and, being sincere, have a sincere apology, because you're able to show that person that, you are sorry and that you do, value them, that you don't want to, just speak to them in any way. And then another thing I like to do is, and sometimes it drives my wife a little crazy, is whenever we get into any type of argument, after it's over, I'm always like, okay, how do we not do this again? And I make sure we sit and we talk, and I say, okay, what made you angry? Was it my tone? Did I say this? Like, what happened? And so a lot of times that helps to stop future arguments, because if I'm doing something that I have no idea is, getting on her nerves or irritating her or whatever, and I don't know, then I'm gonna keep doing it, and we're gonna have the same argument, in a week or whatever. Um, and then the third thing is, I would say look at your habits and look at what makes you angry and why you got angry. Because a lot of times we take after, people who we grew up around. It could be our parents or siblings or whatever,
Yeah.
and maybe that's how people talked, or that's how your family talked to each other. When they got mad, they just yelled at you, and that was it. And now you do that, or maybe you just shut down when you get angry, and now you handle your anger that way as well, which is not good either if you just hold it in whenever you get angry. um, and so, yeah, I would say that apologize, figure out why you got angry, and then also look at your habits and attempt to change those and transform those.
Yeah, that is good. I love what you said about, and man, this is a lot of work, and it takes a lot of humility to go back afterward and say, how can we make sure that this doesn't happen again? This is such a good thing for siblings to do, and man, that would be hard, because then you really have to do what Pastor Tony is talking about. Then you really have to listen and say, okay, what is it that's going on? And listening in a way that you do not become defensive right away, because that is going to happen. They're going to say something that they perceived you doing that is going to offend you. And that's the problem with anger anyway. When we're angry, man, we feel like we have 100% of the truth and they are 100% wrong. And that's why I'm mad at you. It's like this whole thing. And this is why I love the listening test and saying, hey, could it be that I'm not totally in the right here? And the answer, of course, is yes, you are not in the right. You might be more in the wrong than you even realize, and talking that through. So that's so good, Pastor Daniel. Good job.
Yeah. One thing I just want to add in there, Pastor Daniel, when you were talking, it made me, you didn't say this, but it was very close. It made me think of recognizing our triggers. And one of the things that I know for me, and I know a lot of people are like this, when I'm hungry, when I'm tired,
Yeah,
man, I am in a very susceptible state to become angry, And so recognizing your triggers. And so that means you need to be more on guard. You need to be more full of the Holy Spirit, in those moments, or just get some food and go to bed, and just keep your mouth shut, so you don't say anything, until you can go to sleep and get some food. So
I agree 100%. As a matter of fact, I don't know what you guys have. This is like, looking into PS's life here for a moment. But when I fast, I have to be really careful, because that is like the first few days I can be really cranky, because, it's the food thing. You're so right. And then you just like, I don't know why I'm mad, but I'm just mad. And it's because you're hungry. So you were so spot on. That is so true.
Yeah, that was really helpful for me too, because I think when I think of like anger triggers, man, when I am rushed, when I feel like I'm rushed, like I don't have a lot of time, I got to get this done. That's when I'm the most angry. And I mean, just that advice, Pastor Tony, helps me, because I know in those moments when I know I'm feeling rushed, I need to be careful. And I've never made that connection before or used that as like a heads up. It's really good. I also think like it's really important that we create healthy habits. Anger can create habits in us. We can start to have a habit of response and a habit of what our face does when something happens, and it communicates that we're angry to people. I know that I lived with a member at our church. His name's Justin Belat, for a year. And it was really hard for me to encourage, like just like nonchalantly encourage people, like unless there was like a situation happening where we were encouraging, like I could do it. But Justin taught me how to encourage. Like it was almost like a habit for him. We'd be hanging out, not even talking, in the same room, and he'd be like, man, Leo, you're so awesome. And I was like, dude, thank you. And I started to see how not weird that is, and also how uplifting that is. So I started to love that and want to like display that myself. So I started to try it and do it. and claim it the way Justin did. And I started to see that habit trump my other habits, of maybe giving people a hard time or joking at other people's expense, right? I started to watch this habit become my reaction instead of anger being my reaction. So find ways to create healthy habits that are opposite of what leads you to anger or the actions that you make whenever you are angry.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah, that is so good. And I mean, like, I love how we were talking through anger, because anger really, when you are angry with someone and when that like stays with you, talking through those things with the other person is a really big deal. I want to take a huge like swing here for a moment and kind of do a curveball, but we're talking about, being angry with people, but I do feel like we want to jump into this for a second. Obviously we have to talk with people when they're when we're angry with them, and I would love to hear you guys' response on that too. But what do we do? Let's say someone is listening and they're like, I have any problem with anybody. I'm not angry at anybody. I'm really just ticked at God. I'm angry at God. How do you deal with that? What's your response?
My answer would be, if you're angry with God, let that anger lead you to research and prayer. Okay, so it's very easy, if you're angry to God, to walk away from God, or to make definitive conclusions based on your anger or based on the circumstance that just happened. I would encourage you that if you're angry with God, or something in your life is upsetting you, and you think that God, may have something to do with it, you know what, he might. But I want to offer that it's probably something good. Like, God is probably revealing something in your heart that needs healing. And I would offer that if you will just lean into the Lord instead of pull away, and research what's happening and why it's happening, then God will reveal to you new things and give you revelations that will give you conclusions to what you're experiencing.
Yeah, that's good. I would also say to talk to God about it. I mean, if you're
Yes.
angry with God, like a lot of times I hear that, and those people aren't praying, they're not reading the word, they're not doing anything to communicate with God about this anger, right? I mean, a lot of times things happens that we don't understand, that make us sad, that make us angry, whatever it is. But you got to talk to God about it, right? Because if you don't talk to him, then how are you going to get any answers to these questions? I mean, the answer is probably is always going to be, you don't really have a right to be angry. That's just what the truth is, right? He's God. We're just normal people. We're never going to understand God and his ways, right? His ways are above us. But, you know, we have these emotions, right? And they're God given, right? So we should talk to God about these things, because, I mean, I've had moments where, I've been confused or whatever. But if I didn't talk to God about it, I would just stay in that confusion. I would stay in, those doubts or whatever. And so, going to God in prayer and in his word, like Pastor Leo was saying, researching, that way you're able to gain understanding about whatever the situation is, and you're able to get past that. But if you don't do that, then you're just going to hold on to that anger. That anger is going to turn into bitterness, and it'll just stay like that. So
Right.
Yeah, I love what these awesome guys have said. And so, in addition to this, I would say, and kind of jumping off what Pastor Daniel just said, I think that if you are struggling with anger with God, to me, I don't think you understand properly two things. First of all, I think you're not understanding the nature of God. You have to understand, because if you're angry with God, you don't have as the foundation the fact that God is just, that he is good. And so that is a huge aspect, that you have to understand based on, and I would encourage you to look up scriptures that declare those things, because there's tons of them, and read through those again and again to establish that foundation, to renew the thinking of your mind that God is just and he is good. Because if you're angry at God, then the assumption is that you feel God has wronged you in some way, which is obviously impossible. The second thing that you may not be understanding, and that may make you think God has wronged you, is you probably don't understand the nature of the fall, right? Genesis 3, Adam and Eve sinned, and they plunged what was a good, perfect creation into sin and corruption, death and brokenness, right? That was not God's doing. That was Adam and Eve's doing. And we all are living in the consequences of that. Of course, the good news being that he sent Jesus Christ to redeem us from the bondage to sin and corruption and all those things. But if you want to blame anybody about whatever is happening in your life, you can blame Adam and Eve, right? But ultimately, we're just as guilty as they. So thank God for Jesus Christ.
Right. Yeah. Such a good response from all of you guys. I think one of the reasons why this is such a tough one too is like, anger in general, like sometimes, like we talked about, it feels good to be angry, and it's so much easier sometimes to just stay mad at someone. And let's take even like if yes, God, but even someone else, it takes so much work and so much humility to say, again, like, could I be wrong? And when we are angry at God, like what you were saying, it's like we almost feel like God owes us something. Like you did not give me something that I deserved, that I know I deserved, and God, you took something away from me. You didn't give me this, and therefore I'm mad at you. So for us to say that, God, you owe us something, is really, I'm going to say, it's kind of crazy. Like when you put it in perspective of who God is and who we are. And just because something bad happens to me in my life, and believe me, I've had some bad things happening. We've lost kids and and all these different things. And so like literally, like we had a stillborn son, and that did not let me be like, God, I hate you. I can't stand you. And I'm mad at you. That didn't even come up. Like, because I know, and this goes back to what Pastor Tony was saying, I know who God is. I know that he's a good God, that he's a good father. And you're right, when you understand that concept, that's not even something like, I don't get mad at God. If anything, I usually get mad at myself because I know I'm usually the problem in a lot of things. But such a great answer, guys. That's so good. As we kind of wrap this up a little bit, I would love to hear any like last thoughts that you guys have on anger. If you guys have anything in the chat, I've been kind of looking a little bit down there, and you guys have some good stuff in there too. If there's any more questions, shoot them out right now, or like any last closing thoughts from you guys.
Sure, I would say that I think it's important for us to remind ourselves and know that anger is never the best option. It's easy for these questions to lead us to like, oh, when can I be angry? Can I be angry here? Is it okay if I'm angry but I don't act on it? Almost like we've said before, asking the wrong question. Really what we should be doing is, Lord, how can I remove my anger entirely, like Ephesians chapter 4 says. So I would say remind yourself that, anger is never the best. I can almost never think of a situation where anger would be better than love or grace, or where anger would be better than wisdom and patience. So I would encourage everybody, don't go looking for ways that it's okay to be angry, or where it might be okay to be angry, but instead look for situations to display the heart of God, both in your life and in the lives of others. And in order for us to display the heart of God, we have to know the heart of God. So search the heart of God, grow to know the heart of God, so that you can display it in all situations.
Amen.
Yeah, that's awesome. I would say for anyone listening right now, if you do have, anger or stuff like that, that's built up in your life, to address that now. Like, don't try to wait. Don't try to put it off. Like, address that now, because the longer you leave it there, the more it'll turn into resentment and bitterness and, all these things that, we shouldn't be holding on to, that we should be giving to God, that we should be forgiving and giving grace. And, forgiveness doesn't mean it's okay, whatever happened, but it's also, what we're told to do is to, forgive. And so I would just say that, because I mean, in my personal life, I had to deal with that of, the way I dealt with anger was holding it inside. And for years I held it and held it and held it and held it. And it was not good. And, that's part of my testimony, but a lot of it could have been avoided if I addressed it earlier. And so I would just encourage you guys to, whatever's going on, you can let it go. And also, whatever the situation is, God can redeem that. Like God can definitely completely transform that situation. If it's a relationship or whatever it is, like I have a friend that his parents were, doing all types of stuff. They were, abusive towards each other. And now, God was able to, transform them, and they're now like marriage counselors. And so the worst situation can be redeemed. But, start off with letting go of that anger, process that, talk to God about it, talk to mentors and safe people in your life that will help you process and get through it.
It's good stuff. Yeah, I think we've established pretty clearly in this podcast that the Bible has a very strong stance on anger and has really nothing good to say about human anger. But as a counterbalance to that, I do want to just point out this one nuance that, like we said, anger is a natural reaction to a perceived wrong, and it is healthy, hear me clearly, to acknowledge that you feel angry so you can identify what happened and why it made you feel that way.
Yes.
Right? I'm not saying that getting angry is healthy, but acknowledging, being honest with yourself enough to say, like Pastor Dan was just saying, that you're feeling that, and then dealing with it and having the proper response and how to de-escalate the situation before it turns into anything ungodly. So that's what I want to leave you guys with.
Love it. That is so good. I love what you guys are saying. Kind of going back on what Pastor Lewis said too. It's never a good response to be angry. So what's the right response? What should we be doing? What should we be walking in? Well, it is written on Pastor Daniel's shirt right there on the front, on the top. It says love, and that is what we should be walking in. I love what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13. He's describing love, and he says this: love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it is not rude, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, and it keeps no record of wrong. And then it goes on and describes it even more. But love is almost like the antidote to hate and anger. And if we walk in love, we walk in the Spirit. And for me, even, like, I am a lot better with my emotions when it comes to anger when I have spent time in His presence. And the more I am in His presence, the closer I am to Jesus, the better I walk through all of that. So I want to echo what you guys said. If this is something that you are dealing with, talk to someone, even getting counseling in this. If this is something that you're constantly dealing with, this is important that we deal with it now. And so let's deal with it. Let's talk to us if you guys want to. We can have counselors. If you're angry at your parents, those are things that need to be addressed, and it's really important because again, we want to be like Jesus, and Jesus walks in love. So let us walk in love as well. So that'll be my response as we close out. Appreciate you guys so much. Appreciate you guys in the chat there. You guys are awesome. You guys have been so cool and jumping on every week. And we are excited to say that next week we are not having a podcast because we will be live. As a matter of fact, we will be obviously on campus, but we're also live streaming. Pastor Leo and Pastor Dan, I think, have worked it out that we're going to be live streaming as well. So in case you cannot make it, our services will be online as well. And then we're going to be back the following week with a podcast that is going to be completely out of the ordinary, and you guys are going to have to tune in for that and see what's going to happen. But it's going to be very, very different. So you guys, it's going to be fun. Join us for 2 weeks in the podcast, and again next week for our actual service at 5979. Can't wait to see you guys. Love you. We'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.